Hi everyone, this is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. I have a very special episode planned today. I'm going to be telling you about an experience I had to Earth 10 million years in the future. Before I get to that, though, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. Typically, when I astral project, 99% of the time, my projections are very similar to the ones that many astral projectors have. I'll fly around for a bit, or I'll fly around the shore or around a mountaintop, and the experience ends fairly quickly. I don't write about those because there's nothing really to write about. From an astral projection standpoint, it's pretty dull, pretty boring. But maybe 1% of the time, maybe less, I'll have an experience that is so profound and so interesting that I won't even talk about it for a while. I'll hold it close to me because it's something that I'll think about, it's something that I'll treasure, it's something that's just mine. This particular experience happened about a year ago, and I haven't told anyone about it, not even my family members, because it was something that I needed to hold on to for a while. But now I'm ready to share it, so it'll become the property of thousands of other folks, and I hope you enjoy it and find it fascinating. This is Earth 10 million years AD. I decided to leave my body and travel into the deep future. At first, I set my sights on 5 million years in the future, but then quickly switched to 10 million years in the future as my destination. As a result, I'm unsure about the exact time frame of my eventual destination, but it was probably somewhere in between there. But I'm going to call this 10 million years AD for the sake of brevity. I experienced my usual moment of unconsciousness as the eons flew by, crowding my vision with rapidly changing landscapes. Imagine seeing millions of years of days and nights all flashing before your consciousness like a movie that some madmen set at 1,000 times the normal speed. That's what I'll ordinarily see before I black out. When I awoke, I was flying low over a thick forest of trees. In far future travels, I usually soar high above the earth and give it a once over from high orbit to get my bearings. Below me, I found a planet substantially greener than I'd ever seen it. Forests covered my home country of the United States from the Mississippi River to the East Coast. South America was covered in thick jungle. No traces of the burned scars made by men clearing the jungle for agriculture, lumber, gold extraction were in evidence from my lofty perch. Flying east, I looked for other major changes. The biggest change I recall was Eastern Africa. Below me, I found what looked like a large part of Somalia, Kenya, and Tanzania had broken away from the continent, with a secondary chunk also floating apart in the south, reaching down to what had once been South Africa. In my survey of the planet, I found no evidence of any man made buildings, monuments, or cities. If I hadn't known the extent of 21st century man's accomplishments, I wouldn't have suspected that he had ever been on this blue green rock floating in space. Having seen enough from orbit, I returned to my old stomping grounds of what had once been called Eastern Pennsylvania. Penn's Woods had once more earned its old name, as I looked for a clearing where I could land in this dense woods. I soared over the landscape about 1,000 feet up when I noticed a ruckus transpiring below in a clearing. From my elevated perch, I could see a large furry creature attacking a humanoid. My first instinct was to offer assistance, so I quickly descended like a missile. I landed heavily on the back of the predator, knocking the wind out of it. Remember, when I go into the future, especially the far future, my body takes on a form of mass slash force slash energy. So it can be perceived, it can be seen, and it can be felt. So I impacted upon that creature pretty heavily. The prey scampered away as I took a closer look at my new enemy. It was big as a small black bear, but had the appearance of a nightmare rat. As it struggled to catch its breath, its jaws gaped open and shut repeatedly, uh, barring some impressive-looking sharp fangs and teeth. While I studied it closer, it regained its composure sooner than I had expected and leaped on top of me, knocking me to the ground. For a few seconds, I watched in horror as it sought in vain to penetrate and tear asunder skin, bone, and blood that I'd left millions of years in the past lying on my bed. At that instant, I saw large flying bat-like creatures bombing my attacker and harassing it. A few grazed its back lightly with claws, prompting the creature to move off me and beat a hasty retreat back into the forest. Once the giant rat thing was gone, a few of my rescuers landed. One of them appeared slightly injured, and I surmised that must have been the rat's original prey that I saved with my aerial attack. She was about 5 foot tall, or about 1.5 meters. She was humanoid in appearance, as I had originally observed, with a light brown face that was humanish, almond eyes, and a skeletal thin frame that couldn't have weighed more than 70 pounds or 32 kilos. Her head wasn't covered in hair like a human, but brown scales. However, the real remarkable part of her physiology was a bat-like membrane that stretched along her back, connected to her two arms, which also looked more closely like a bat's than anything human. My new friend approached me with what I took as concern on her face. She examined my astral body, looking for wounds or gouges from sharp rat fangs. Finding no obvious gouges, she next examined my back, looking for my missing wings. Her confusion was evident as she looked at me puzzled and a little alarmed. I sensed she thought that perhaps my furry attacker had ripped them from me. I beamed a message of comfort, and her countenance relaxed. Looking around warily for any reappearance of the giant rat, she motioned me to follow her. She walked lightly in front of me toward a cliff dotted with a number of holes or caves. The whole complex reminded me of nesting seabird colonies who sought out the safety of cliffs to rear their young far away from ground predation. Her people were busily clawing their way up the cliff nimbly from the ground, while others flew into the openings. I surmised that, like bats, she and her people might have trouble getting airborne from ground level. I elected to take the easy way up and just levitated to the cliff top. This singular movement elicited some amazed looks from my humanoid bat friends. Once I landed, I endured another thorough examination, this time by a group of my new friends. As they looked me over, I did a light mental scan of them. Their thoughts weren't like animals that I had probed in the past. They had self-awareness and intelligence, but nowhere near that of the human race I had left behind in the past. They reminded me of very young children with an innate sense of curiosity. I sensed a tiny flame of something like humanity in them that surprised and shocked me. Was I seeing something that wasn't there? Something I wanted to see? Thoughts and questions swirled in my head. Were these the inheritors of the human race? Or the results of some mad genetic experiment? A completely new race that had evolved into its present form from God knows what primitive animal? I had a lot of questions, but few answers. My injured friend woke me from my reverie by taking my hand and leading me into one of the caves. The rest of her people were doing the same as the red sun below the horizon, or as the red sun set below the horizon of this brave new world. Once inside, I beheld a rather bare, slightly claustrophobic cave. My friend offered me some red berries and a ripped open rodent that looked like a vole. I smiled my thanks, but politely refused the proffered meal. I was glad my astral body didn't require physical nourishment as I watched them gulp down the fruit and tear into and consume the raw meat of the small animals. Two pairs of small but undoubtedly razor-sharp fangs aided in the consumption of the meat. I saw no evidence of campfires or cooking. Apparently, they hadn't discovered fire yet, or at most, didn't see any use for it. Once their modest meal was finished, everyone in the cave huddled together. I could see in their thoughts that the outside temperature was dropping rapidly, and sharing body heat was an obvious survival strategy. I didn't feel the cold personally, but I was touched that they included me in their group as if I was one of them. I wondered silently how a group of humans would have treated one of these creatures if they just dropped out of the sky, out of nowhere. The next morning dawned brightly, with the early morning light creeping into the front of our small cave. There didn't appear to be any breakfast putting in an appearance, and there certainly wasn't any Keurig coffee maker slurping away. I idly wondered if the coffee plant even still existed in this distant time. Oh, what horror if there was no coffee in that time. My new friends launched themselves off our cliff as I surveyed the new day. The female I had saved seemed to be doing well, with her skin wounds already showing signs of healing. I telepathically probed my concern for her, but she flashed a small smile and motioned skyward. Without further ado, she sprightly leaped from our perch as well, soaring skyward after a brief drop. I willed myself into the air behind her. Thinking of her graceful movement and petite form, I decided to name her Sprite. We flew together over the forest until a river was sighted moving lazily below. Sprite's people began diving and catching flying insects midair in their jaws, or swooping down to snare a variety of scurrying small animals running along the riverbank below. Wishing to contribute to their efforts, I sighted a giant flat-shelled turtle sunning itself on a rock midstream. I know it had been seen by my company, but I reasoned that it might be too big for them to handle. In addition, I imagined taking off again from the mid-river rock might be too difficult to manage safely, at least for them. I dove towards my relaxing prey and landed hard upon its shell. Its head and limbs disappeared in shock within its greenish-brown armor. I proudly hefted my catch and prepared to rejoin my flock, when a flash of reflected sunlight caught my eye from the recently eroded riverbank. Moving to the river's edge, I pulled loose a shard of glass that must have been buried there for a very long time. I was ready to toss it aside as flotsam of a bygone age when a brilliant idea came to me. High above, I observed the group beginning to return to the cliff eyrie with breakfast. I moved to follow them with both my new treasures. Upon my return, I found Sprite waiting for me back home. She issued a high-pitched squeal that I took for excitement at my catch. The rest of the group joined her and made ready to butcher the still-living turtle. Before they could start, I motioned for them to stop. I wanted to show them a trick that would benefit them greatly. I then flipped the animal on its back and returned to the forest floor below. Sprite followed behind me. A light scan of her thoughts showed confusion at my actions. I landed at a tree with dry peeling bark, while Sprite circled above. I collected as much bark as I could hold, along with a variety of kindling scattered about the forest floor. I then returned to the cliff with Sprite following closely behind. Upon landing, I dumped my fuel on the ground and selected some smaller bits. I was about to start what might be the first intelligent man-made fire in millions of years. I had the close attention of our cliff inhabitants as I used my piece of ancient glass to focus the morning sun's rays onto the dry bark. In a few minutes, a puff of smoke emerged, with a small fire springing up soon after. The Bat People looked at me as someone today might look at David Copperfield, the magician, after he made a jet or the Statue of Liberty disappear. I gently stoked the fire with additional kindling and wood until a small campfire had arisen. I then used the glass to cut the head from the flailing turtle and placed it into the fire to cook. I sensed the unease and the disappointment of the group when they saw me waste such an amazing banquet for no good reason. I just beamed back a blanket request for them to just wait a bit longer before despairing. Most just turned away and began consuming the insects and the small animals that they had brought back with them. Only Sprite stayed by my side as I demonstrated the first cooking lesson in probably several millions of years. As our shelled breakfast cooked in its very own container, I taught Sprite how to use the shard of glass to start a fire. She marveled at this miracle of engineering like a modern human might a new computer or a brand new power tool. She emitted a series of additional squeals and squeaks as her fire blazed to life as well. I showed her the warmth that such a fire gave off, pointing out how valuable it might be on cold nights or mornings. She stared entranced at her new skill as I thought about the ancient Greek legend of Prometheus. Prometheus had been a titan that had wished to help man better his lot. To accomplish this goal, he stole fire from the gods and presented it to man. In a terrible retribution for this theft, the god Zeus had Prometheus chained to a rock where a giant eagle would visit him each day to tear and eat his liver from his living body. His organ was doomed to grow back each day for all eternity, whereupon the process would start all over again the next day. Luckily for me, those ancient gods were long dead. When the turtle was ready, the shell had split open. As Sprite and the people watched, I mimed eating the meat and smiling. After some natural reluctance, Sprite tasted the cooked flesh, with the others soon following suit. They must have found my recipe delicious, as everyone began helping themselves to additional slices of turtle a la Rick. I thought about the history of humans. About 1 million years BCE, our progenitors had mastered fire and had begun using it to cook their meat. Such flesh was more easily digested, and more nutrition could now be obtained than had ever been available in raw meat meals previously. Over the following eons, the brains of our ancestors gradually became larger, until modern Homo sapiens had eventually emerged. I wondered if I had set this species on that same evolutionary road. Watching the meal finishing up, I felt the recall signal from millions of years in the past. Deciding not to fight it, I returned to my 21st century bedroom with a farewell wave. Well, that was my experience. I've been holding on to it now like a precious little jewel for over a year. I hope you got something interesting out of it. It was certainly not what I expected. As a matter of fact, one of the ideas, or one of the things that I saw on TV that gave me the idea to do this was a program that optimistically saw humans 10 million years in the future or so, traveling in fleets of high-tech spaceships to other galaxies. Unfortunately, that's just not what I saw. I guess every species has its time, and then it's time for the next page in history to be turned. So let's fully participate in humanity and its goals and dreams right now, because who knows how long we're going to have. It won't be forever, that much I can tell you. If you like this, please hit the like button, share with those of like minds, subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and hit the bell if you have subscribed. I'd be very interested in your questions or comments, so please leave those below. And as always, I will see you on the astral plane.